the heart of Manhattan's Lower East Side, beneath today's crowded streets, rest the forgotten remains of one of the nation's darkest institutions. From 1834 to 1867, the House of Religious Correction for Wayward Women, ruled by the Murphy family, claimed to save lost souls through Christian discipline. Records say 456 women passed through its doors. Only 127 ever came out alive. For over 3 decades, the Murphys built a system so vile that when investigators finally stormed the building, what they found tested the very definition of human cruelty. For nearly 100 years, the truth stayed locked in court archives until a 1934 construction crew stumbled upon the hidden basement chambers that revealed the terrible reach of their cruelty. Before uncovering the twisted legacy of Warden Patrick Murphy and his family, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss these chilling stories, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from, because these events may have happened closer to your home than you think. What the Murphys created was far more than a correctional house. It was a finely tuned machine of exploitation that would sicken even the most hardened criminals. New York in 1834 was a city ready to erupt with moral panic and religious fervor. The Second Great Awakening swept across America like wildfire, leaving a society obsessed with sin's salvation and the purifying of souls. The city's population had surged beyond 300,000. And in the cramped, filthy tenements, poverty and desperation multiplied like vermin in the walls. Irish immigrants fleeing the oncoming famine arrived in swarms dumped from ships onto the docks like sacks of grain. In this chaos, Patrick Murphy, once a prison guard from County Cork, saw an opportunity that would make his family rich beyond their dreams. Patrick was a giant of a man, 6'3", whose shadow seemed to devour the light around him. His scarred hands, toughened by years in Ireland's dreaded Kilmum jail, could snap a wrist as easily as a twig. A ragged scar carved from ear to mouth marked a botched escape attempt, but it was his icy pale blue eyes, empty of any warmth, that exposed the monster lurking beneath his pious facade. When he spoke of God's will, it was with the certainty of a man who believed himself to be divine judgment. From rebels and prisoners back home, he had learned that every soul has a breaking point, and that the right mix of pain and manipulation could find it. His wife, Kathleen Murphy, had perfected cruelty disguised as care during her time as a workhouse supervisor in Boston's Irish Quarter. Average in stature but towering in presence, she had an uncanny gift for inflicting psychological torment while wearing the mask of concern. Her lips curled into what looked like a smile, but her dark eyes revealed a near sensual delight in humiliation. Kathleen knew that breaking a spirit took precision. Push too hard, and they would retreat into madness and become useless too little, and they would cling to hope and remain dangerous. She modeled her methods after the Magdalen institutions in Ireland, where women were worked to death in the name of redemption, refining them with her own twisted innovations. Patrick's younger brother Shaw, the institution's chaplain, brought a chilling intellectual cruelty to their operation. Once a brilliant seminary student turned bitter failure, expelled from 3 theological schools. For dangerous interpretations of Scripture, Shaw's sermons could wring confessions from women for sins they had never committed. His mastery of human fears and religious guilt let him exploit each weakness like a surgeon. His encyclopedic knowledge of theology gave him the tools to twist any faith into a weapon. Shaw even studied the Spanish Inquisition not as history, but as a manual for breaking human will. The family's reach grew when Patrick's eldest son, Thomas, returned from Boston after a failed shipping venture. Thomas brought a network of corrupt politicians, police, and businessmen who would shield their crimes and help them thrive, along with a sharp understanding of New York's tangled power structures. Unlike his father's brute force, Thomas's cruelty was refined, shaped by his Harvard education and exposure to ruthless business practices. He understood that true control came not from violence, but from the slow destruction of hope, from making victims complicit in their own suffering. He applied the lessons of his business failures. Diversification calculated risk to their criminal empire with terrifying skill. The final piece of this monstrous family was Mary Murphy Patrick's sister-in-law and Kathleen's closest ally, a woman broken and reshaped by tragedy. She had endured a nightmare voyage from Ireland, where cholera claimed her husband and children. That horror left her with a burning hatred for weakness and a belief that suffering was divine punishment. Her rough knowledge of herbs and primitive surgery learned during that deadly crossing allowed the Murphys to keep their victims alive longer than nature intended, drawing out their torment with meticulous care. Mary served as the institution's medical attendant, a position that gave her complete access to every woman who entered their doors and allowed her to document both body and mind for the family's profit. The House of Religious Correction for Wayward Women opened on a bitter February morning in 1834, taking over a massive 4-story brick building that had once been a textile factory. Its location was chosen with care, close enough to the city's center for convenience, but far enough from respectable neighborhoods to avoid watchful eyes. The very structure reflected New York's industrial rise, built in 1820 for textile production and abandoned when manufacturing moved to Massachusetts, leaving behind an empty shell that perfectly suited the Murphy family's plans. The windows were sealed with bricks, leaving only narrow slits that allowed just enough light to navigate, but never enough for the women to track time or weather. This confusion was intentional, and soon they lost all sense of days and weeks, making them easy to control. To silence their screams, the Murphys spent a fortune on soundproofing, padding the walls with heavy wool so that nothing could be heard outside. The walls themselves were painted in deep, oppressive colors that swallowed light and smothered spirits long before the torment began. Outwardly, the institution posed as a progressive place of redemption, where women guilty of prostitution, drunkenness, adultery, or other moral failings could be saved through prayer, honest labor, and Christian education. The Murphy family courted judges, police, and wealthy families with pamphlets, glowing testimonials, and promises of a humane alternative to the filth of Blackwell's Island or the city jails. What made the operation so dangerous was that it all stood on a solid legal foundation. In the 1830s, New York's moral reform laws gave tremendous power to religious institutions, and the Murphys exploited every loophole, writing their charter to grant themselves absolute control over anyone placed in their care. Once a woman entered, she effectively disappeared from the system until the family chose to let her out if they ever did. Almost any behavior could be spun into moral corruption that required rehabilitation, and this vagueness became their weapon. The success of their enterprise relied on a web of corruption that Thomas Murphy wove patiently over the years, from beat cops on the street to the city's most powerful figures. These men were not just tolerant of the Murphys' work, they were among its most valuable patrons and protectors. Judge Hamilton Prescott of the Manhattan Criminal Court was one of their greatest allies. Publicly a moral crusader and pillar of the Presbyterian Church, privately he used his courtroom to feed the house a steady stream of victims. He sentenced girls for nothing more than speaking too loudly, being alone with a man, or drawing unwanted attention. Young women without family or connections were his preferred prey. What no record showed was that Prescott demanded regular reports on their treatment and paid well for private sessions, where he could personally oversee their supposed redemption. He perfected legal excuses that allowed him to stretch sentences indefinitely, ensuring his favorites never left. Police Captain Frederick Dunham controlled the supply of women on the street, using the city's broad morality laws like a weapon. His men targeted young Irish and German immigrants, the poor, the isolated, anyone unable to fight back. He trained them to fabricate evidence so that a love letter became proof of adultery, a single drink was drunkenness, and an innocent conversation turned into solicitation. Dunham kept detailed notes on potential victims, tracking their daily habits and weaknesses so that arrests could be planned in advance. The family's list of clients extended beyond these corrupt officials, reaching into New York's wealthiest and most respected circles. Shipping magnate Cornelius Vanderburg came every Tuesday paying the wages of an entire month's work for the privilege of counseling new arrivals. His tastes were specific, and the Murphys tailored their cruelty to match. His wealth and influence made him completely immune to consequence. Dr. Elias Whitfield, a member of the city's Board of Health, provided medical examinations that decided which women could be sold into the most profitable services and kept disease from infecting paying clients. Most shocking of all was Reverend Josiah Hartford, pastor of one of Manhattan's largest Methodist congregations, whose involvement shielded the institution from suspicion for years. Hartford not only justified their work with sermons, but actively sought out vulnerable women from his own flock, delivering them straight into the Murphy family's hands. Young women who sought Hartford's spiritual counsel, hoping for comfort and guidance, instead found themselves condemned as morally corrupt and in need of harsh rehabilitation. From the pulpit, he preached weekly about the dangers of female corruption, planting fear and suspicion in the hearts of his congregation so that parishioners eagerly reported women they thought might fall into sin. His approval carried so much weight in religious circles that ministers from other congregations began sending troubled women to the House of Religious Correction without question. The Murphy family also extended their influence into the city's young social reform movement, twisting it into another trap. Mary Murphy, who posed as a tireless advocate for women's welfare, took a position on the board of the Ladies' Moral Reform Society. From there, she quietly selected potential victims, steering those who came for help straight into the hands of the Murphys. Her reputation as a kind protector gave her free access to records of women across the city, turning organizations built to save them into perfect hunting grounds. Meanwhile, Thomas Murphy built an intricate network of financial relationships with banks and investment houses, laundering the family's blood-soaked profits through legitimate channels. The Merchants Bank of New York, under President Samuel Rothwell, accepted large deposits without question and funneled them into shipping real estate and government bonds. This system not only disguised the family's income, but allowed them to produce respectable wealth that appeared untouchable to investigators. Life inside the House of Religious Correction followed a precise pattern crafted to grind away dignity and resistance until death or absolute submission. From the moment a woman crossed the threshold, a process began that reduced her to property. It started with the intake ritual, a calculated mix of humiliation and conditioning that broke down the self before any physical punishment began. The first stop was a windowless basement room, known as the Purification Chamber, where Mary Murphy carried out a degrading ritual masked as a medical and spiritual examination. There, the women were stripped bare and subjected to invasive inspections under the pretext of detecting disease, while Mary cataloged every physical trait for the family's records. Hair color, eye color, scars, birthmarks, defects. Even guesses at age and sexual history, nothing was overlooked. These details were compiled into detailed profiles and circulated to the family's clientele so that men could choose women according to their preferences. Once the body was cataloged, Shaw Murphy took over with what he called the spiritual assessment, an interrogation designed to unearth every fear, weakness, and hidden wound. He had refined an expert knowledge of human behavior, identifying pressure points with terrifying speed. Some women were controlled with crushing religious guilt, others by threats against their loved ones, and still others by dangling the promise of eventual freedom like bait on a hook. Shaw Murphy's evaluations determined not just how each woman would be treated, but how long she could endure before breaking or dying. The building itself had been turned into a labyrinth of confusion, designed to crush any sense of control. Corridors ended abruptly, staircases led nowhere, and rooms were mislabeled so no one could form a map of their surroundings. The family knew that confusion was a weapon and spent years shaping the space into a place where even time seemed to dissolve. Doors had no signs, hallways twisted unpredictably, and the light was kept so dim that every step was a threat. From the first moment inside, every woman became a number. Their names were stripped away, their possessions burned in a grim ceremony, where Patrick Murphy declared that their old sinful selves were being cast into ash. Even wedding bands and religious tokens were destroyed, while Shaw gave a sermon about rebirth, forcing the women to watch their last ties to the outside world disappear. Life in the house was a cycle designed to drain body and soul, while turning them into a source of income. Each day began at 4 a.m., with 2 hours of prayer and confession, not to God, but to Shaw, who forced them to admit to sins they had never committed. These sessions crushed any sense of worth, and the written confessions became legal tools to justify their endless captivity. Breakfast was a thin, foul porridge and stale bread, barely enough to keep them alive. Hunger and weakness became shackles of their own, leaving the women too frail to rebel. The family calculated rations precisely to keep them alive, but docile. After the morning's torment came work laundry for hotels, sewing for retailers, manufacturing small goods, all with dangerous, outdated equipment in suffocating, stinking rooms. Those who collapsed were either discarded or reassigned to even more degrading duties. By afternoon came the sermons. For hours Shaw would preach, while the women stood berating them, with accusations of sin and declaring that their pain was their only path to salvation. He drew from the darkest lessons of the Inquisition, turning guilt and fear into chains tighter than any lock. Nightfall brought the most dreadful part of their day, the private guidance sessions. They were told these were meetings with pious Christian men offering moral help, but the truth was that this was the true core of the Murphy family's enterprise. In the basement rooms, stripped of light and hope, women were offered up to wealthy men whose appetites knew no limits. The family cataloged the women like cattle, classifying them by appearance, temperament, and the fantasies of their clients. Some clients sought the utterly broken, others delighted in the challenge of breaking the strong. For every depraved taste, there was a victim carefully prepared. The worst cruelty came from the false halo draped over every act. Women were told that defiance was a sin against God, that their agony was holy purification, that their obedience was blessed. Shaw's command of Scripture allowed him to sanctify every violation, convincing many that their suffering was God's will. And just when investigators thought they had reached the deepest depths of this nightmare, the discovery of the family's detailed record books revealed a system so thorough, so calculated, that it laid bare the full scope of their monstrous business. If this story chills you, share it with someone who loves dark history, and remember to like and subscribe so you never miss what lies hidden in the shadows. Let's uncover together what those meticulous records revealed, because the Murphy family's empire was no crude den of vice. It was a fully realized business machine, as sophisticated and methodical as any 19th century industrial enterprise. This was cruelty polished into efficiency, a system that turned human beings into inventory. With his Harvard education and sharp understanding of commerce, Thomas Murphy transformed his family's depravity into a model of cold, calculated exploitation. The Murphys kept 3 sets of books, each carefully designed for a different audience. The the first presented to authorities, painted the house as a modest charity recording income from rehabilitation fees, donations, and the sale of goods made by reformed women. The second shared only with their circle of corrupt officials detailed payoffs, bribes, and the web of financial arrangements that kept the institution beyond reach. The third, discovered decades later, hidden behind a false wall in Thomas's office, told the true story. That secret ledger revealed millions in today's money wealth siphoned from human misery, showing that this house of so-called moral reform was one of the richest criminal enterprises in the country. Their clients were organized with the precision of a luxury club. Entry-level membership aimed at small businessmen and minor officials allowed group access to counseling sessions, public humiliations staged as educational lessons in the dangers of sin. Premium members, those with deep pockets, paid for private sessions with chosen women, received detailed progress reports, and could even shape the rehabilitation plan of their victims. And then there was the platinum tier, the pinnacle of perversion, the right to be present during intake, to choose from the newest arrivals, and to dictate exactly how these women would be broken. For clients with special appetites, the Murphys offered custom experiences. Some paid to play roles in twisted religious pageants orchestrated by Shah Murphy, posing as God's judgment while inflicting their chosen punishments. Others designed torments for women who had rejected them outside the institution, turning the house into a marketplace for revenge disguised as salvation. For those with a taste for spectacle, the Murphys created educational packages where men could observe from beginning to end the destruction of a human spirit from intake to total submission. Their ambitions spread beyond New York. Thomas Murphy built a network of similar institutions in cities like Philadelphia and Boston, creating a trade route for human suffering. When a client tired of local victims, he could request a fresh face from another city, while women who had been drained of all value were shipped off for specialized treatment, disappearing into the system. This traffic was all perfectly legal, hidden under the name of religious rehabilitation. The network also allowed these institutions to warn one another about investigators, ensuring their survival. But of all their monstrous innovations, the most chilling of all was the creation of a breeding program, a scheme that would push their cruelty to an entirely new level. Though the Murphy family's records used polite coded language, their meaning was horrifyingly clear. Any woman who became pregnant while imprisoned was moved to locked attic quarters until she gave birth. Afterward, the newborn was either sold for a high price to wealthy couples as a rescued orphan, or kept in the house to be raised as the next generation of captive laborers and abusers. This practice served three purposes. It made money. It replenished their supply of victims, and as Shah Murphy described in his chilling sermons, it created new life, purified by suffering. Mary Murphy managed this program with the same brutal efficiency she brought to every other part of the institution. Her records tracked menstrual cycles, pregnancies, and health with the precision of a breeder, and she decided case by case whether to terminate a pregnancy with her knowledge of herbs or ensure a healthy birth, depending on what would be most profitable. The children grew up never knowing their true origins, raised to believe they had been saved by the charity of the very people who had destroyed their parents' lives. Even beyond the walls of the house, the Murphy family found ways to profit from broken lives. Kathleen Murphy set up contracts with wealthy households and factories, placing the women they had shattered into service as maid seamstresses and workers. These women, terrified and obedient, became perfect employees who never resisted or complained their fear mistaken for virtue by employers who praised the success of their rehabilitation. Behind the scenes, Thomas Murphy turned the operation into an early form of organized human trafficking. Through arrangements with ship captains and immigration officials, the family secured a steady stream of fresh victims, from the desperate women arriving daily in New York Harbor. Alone, penniless, and unfamiliar with the city, these immigrants were easy prey. Promised respectable jobs, they were taken directly into the house's clutches before they had a chance to find safety. The Murphy family's power might have lasted indefinitely, if not for a sudden shift in fortune in 1866. The political network that had protected them for 30 years began to weaken as new reformers gained influence. Detective James Flanagan of the Metropolitan Police, investigating a string of disappearances in Irish neighborhoods, uncovered troubling patterns. For years, young women had been vanishing after being arrested for vague morality charges. At first, his inquiries were ignored until the day his own niece, Margaret O'Sullivan, a hard-working seamstress, was arrested for drunkenness after her fiancé's wake and disappeared without a trace. Margaret's spotless record and sudden arrest made Flanagan suspicious. As he dug into court and police records, he discovered the same pattern repeating morality charges, quick sentencing and transfers to the House of Religious Correction, from which no woman returned. When he tried to see Margaret, he was told she had been moved to another facility for special treatment. But there was no paperwork to confirm it. Flanagan's persistence rattled the Murphy family's allies, especially Captain Dunham, who began to fear exposure. The danger increased when Flanagan enlisted Father Michael Ali, a reformist priest who had been keeping his own notes on the disappearances. Father Ali had noticed that many missing women were devout parishioners with spotless reputations, making their supposed crimes implausible. His investigation revealed that evidence in these arrests was falsified, and that witnesses either contradicted themselves or could not be found. With pressure mounting, Dunham devised a desperate plan: burn the house to the ground. By destroying the building, he hoped to erase all traces of the Murphy family's crimes and silence every victim at once. He ordered corrupt constables to set the fire in the early morning, planning for the flames to consume both the records and the women trapped inside. But his plan went wrong. The fire spread too quickly and caught the attention of Fire Chief Michael O'Brien, a rare, honest official with 30 years of service untouched by corruption. Rushing to the blaze on the night of November 15, 1866, O'Brien expected an ordinary institutional fire. What he found instead shocked the city. As his crew battled the flames, the sound of screams rose from locked basement chambers that were not on any official plans. O'Brien ordered every locked door smashed open, and what his men found inside was beyond anything they could have imagined. Dozens of women, some chained so long, their bodies had twisted and wasted away. Others, scarred and broken from years of torture, were packed into those hidden rooms. The fire had not destroyed the evidence. It had revealed a nightmare, and with it the true face of the Murphy family's reign of terror. Instead of rushing to help the trapped women when the fire erupted, the Murphy family's first instinct was to erase their crimes. Firefighters arriving at the scene witnessed Thomas Murphy hurling ledgers and documents into the growing flames, desperate to destroy the evidence, while Shaw Murphy attempted to shepherd a group of wealthy clients through a secret tunnel that led to a church basement. Their frantic attempts to escape and cover their tracks only deepened suspicions that the building concealed horrors far beyond an ordinary institution. The most chilling sight came in the basement, where Mary Murphy, calm and unhurried, was found poisoning the women who were too injured to flee, explaining to shocked rescuers that she was sparing them future suffering, and insisting they could not be allowed to talk. Her cold, matter-of-fact reasoning made it clear that the family had always understood the monstrous nature of their crimes and feared the justice that public exposure would bring. News of the fire and what it revealed swept across New York with a force that no amount of bribery or political influence could contain. Newspapers that had long ignored rumors about the House of Religious Correction now competed to uncover the ugliest truths. Samuel Jennings of the Herald led the way, piecing together months of hidden records, interviewing survivors, and unraveling the web of payoffs that had allowed the Murphys to operate for over 30 years. His groundbreaking series laid out a conspiracy so enormous that at first many refused to believe it was possible. It exposed judges, police officers, business magnates, and clergy members, showing how deeply the rot had spread. The fallout was immediate. Judge Hamilton Prescott, knowing the net was closing around him, was found dead in his chambers just hours before he was to be arrested, leaving behind a confession that described in detail his crimes and those of his peers. His final words, published in full by the Tribune, served as a roadmap for investigators. Captain Frederick Dunham tried to escape with his family and a suitcase packed with cash, but was caught at the harbor. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he cooperated, trading testimony for a reduced sentence and helping prosecutors bring charges against over 40 influential men. The Murphy family, however, proved harder to pin down. Patrick Murphy died in the burning ruins, but the coroner's report revealed he had been struck on the head before the fire beam fell, likely by one of his victims seizing a last chance for vengeance. The killer's identity was never determined. Kathleen Murphy disappeared entirely. Despite a national manhunt, she was never captured, with rumors placing her in California or hiding with relatives in Europe. Several women fitting her description were arrested in the following years, but none turned out to be the elusive matriarch. Shaw Murphy was captured 3 days later in a monastery in upstate New York, where he had begged church leaders for sanctuary, claiming persecution. Even with clerical protections, the weight of evidence was so overwhelming that the bishops could not shield him. In court, his testimony about the theological justifications he created for their crimes revealed how faith had been warped into a tool of domination and terror. Thomas Murphy's arrest was the most dramatic. Detective Flanagan traced him to Boston, where he was attempting to flee to Europe with a case full of ledgers, photographs, and records. Those documents proved to be a treasure trove, charting the family's crimes from the very beginning and implicating dozens of accomplices across several states. This evidence allowed authorities to dismantle similar operations in other cities. Mary Murphy, meanwhile, was found in the basement amid the bodies of those she had poisoned, sitting quietly, brushing their hair and singing lullabies to them as if they were still alive. She appeared completely detached from reality. Her trial lasted only a few hours before she was declared unfit to stand trial. Confined to an asylum for the rest of her life, she never wavered in her belief that she had been saving the women, insisting until the end that she had given them peace rather than pain. The trials that followed the exposure of the Murphy family became a national spectacle, drawing crowds to the courthouse and reporters from across the country eager to document what quickly came to be called the crime of the century. Day after day, survivors stepped forward to give testimony so harrowing that at times the court fell silent, their words laying bare a system of cruelty so deliberate and so cold that it stunned even the most hardened spectators. The stories were consistent and detailed years of captivity beatings and humiliations disguised as holy ceremonies, the disappearance of friends who never returned, and the relentless psychological manipulation that stripped away all hope. Margaret O'Sullivan, Detective Flanagan's niece and one of those rescued from the fire, gave evidence that proved vital because she had been there less than a year and could clearly describe how new arrivals were broken down step by step. Her account of the intake process, the loss of name and identity, the endless routine of confession and labor revealed exactly how the Murphy family dismantled a woman's will. It was especially damaging because Margaret was a hard-working seamstress from a respectable family, living proof that the victims had not been fallen women, but were respectable citizens, seized and destroyed by those who claimed to save them. Another powerful voice came from Elizabeth Carmichael, a former schoolteacher imprisoned for 3 years after a spiteful false accusation by a rejected suitor. Her education and eloquence made her testimony devastating as she recounted conversations with clients that exposed how the institution had become a catalog for wealthy predators. She explained how clients requested women of specific ages, classes, and professions, and how the Murphys obliged every order as if selling livestock. These accounts shattered the myth of the house as a place of redemption and revealed it instead as a marketplace for degradation, supported by some of the city's most respected citizens. As evidence mounted, the trials revealed just how far the rot had spread into New York's elite. Men who had built careers as public moralists, judges, preachers, businessmen were unmasked as frequent clients of the Murphys. Ledgers seized from Thomas Murphy's private cash tied their names to payments for sessions and even custom requests. The most scandalous trial was that of Reverend Josiah Hartford, once one of the city's most prominent Methodist preachers. Survivors testified that Hartford had personally participated in their abuse, twisting scripture into a justification for every act, while his seized journals revealed a man who had long abandoned the faith he preached instead, viewing his victims as instruments for his gratification. The publication of those journals shocked the public almost as much as the revelations about the house itself. Records seized from Thomas Murphy's escape bag uncovered connections that extended far beyond New York. The Murphys had been exchanging victims and methods with similar institutions in Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, and beyond, creating a network that had hidden in plain sight for decades. Investigators in those cities quickly launched their own inquiries, uncovering similar schemes, though none matched the scope or brutality of the Murphys' enterprise. These trials pushed the legal system to its limits because so much of what had been done fell into areas of the law that had never imagined such abuses. Prosecutors had to construct new arguments, setting legal precedents that would shape criminal justice and oversight of religious institutions for years to come. Defense lawyers tried to argue that their clients had believed in the legitimacy of the rehabilitation efforts. But the mountains of evidence, financial records, survivor testimony letters, and ledgers made these claims crumble. In the end, the sentences were as severe as the law allowed. Shaw Murphy was sentenced to hang and met his death in 1868, defiant to the end, proclaiming that he was innocent and that his death was part of a conspiracy against what he called true Christianity. His final words from the gallows were an unrepentant sermon that justified everything he had done. Thomas Murphy was sentenced to life in prison and died violently in Sing Sing in 1882, beaten to death by fellow inmates who had discovered the truth about his crimes. Many of the officials who enabled the family's power faced disgrace, though not all faced justice. Judge Prescott had already ended his life, leaving behind a full confession, while Captain Dunham, though convicted, received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. Dozens of careers among politicians, judges, and clergy were destroyed, but many of the men involved escaped with little more than public ruin. The trials left a permanent scar on the city, a reminder of what happens when power, greed, and hypocrisy are allowed to masquerade as morality for too long. Several powerful businessmen and prominent religious leaders were ultimately convicted on lesser charges, receiving punishments ranging from heavy fines to short prison sentences. But the nature of the evidence against them strongly suggested that their roles had been far deeper than the courts could conclusively prove. The same social and political influence that had protected them during decades of abuse now served to soften their punishment, a bitter reminder that even when confronted with overwhelming proof of moral corruption, wealth and connections still bent the scales of justice. Yet the fallout from the Murphy case went far beyond the courtrooms. It fundamentally changed how American society viewed the unchecked authority of religious institutions, the moral reform movement, and the vulnerability of those society claimed to protect. The scandal exposed the systemic flaws that allowed such crimes to flourish in secrecy for over 30 years, forcing New York State to completely restructure its oversight of religious and charitable organizations. The sweeping reforms, quickly nicknamed the Murphy Laws, imposed regular inspections, mandated transparent record-keeping, required independent boards, and granted unrestricted family and legal access to residents of any such institution. These new measures soon became a national model, closing loopholes that for decades had been exploited by the corrupt and self-righteous. The revelations also ignited a firestorm within the growing women's rights movement. Activists seized on the Murphy case as irrefutable proof of how American women, lacking full legal standing and social protection, had been left vulnerable to systematic abuse under the guise of morality. Survivors who testified against the Murphys became powerful public voices, their stories showing how easily women could be imprisoned, exploited, and silenced when power went unchecked. Leaders such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton used the scandal as a rallying cry, demanding reforms that would grant women greater control over their lives and protect them from arbitrary detention and institutional abuse. The old building that had once housed the House of Religious Correction was demolished in 1869, and the city ordered the site left vacant for half a century as a memorial to its victims. By the 1920s, the land had been transformed into a small public park. But even then, many New Yorkers avoided it, saying the place felt heavy wrong or haunted without always knowing why. Over time, the story of the Murphys became a cautionary legend, told across the country, a chilling lesson about the danger of unchecked authority and how easily pious rhetoric can be twisted to hide unimaginable crimes. The scandal shaped literature, inspired novels and cautionary tales, and embedded itself into folklore, though no fictional account could ever fully capture the true horror of what had been uncovered. Most importantly, the Murphy case revealed how systematic evil can flourish under the cloak of virtue for decades, and how it thrives when good people choose not to act. It showed the public that the most dangerous predators are not the obvious villains, but those who disguise cruelty as righteousness, using society's own moral institutions as weapons against its most vulnerable. It also revealed how deep corruption can run once it spreads into the fabric of power, with entire systems becoming complicit through both action and silence. Detective James Flanagan, the man whose investigation had finally brought the Murphys down, was promoted to captain and spent the rest of his career uncovering similar abuses. His approach, believing victims following financial trails and identifying systemic patterns rather than isolated acts, became a template for modern investigations into institutional abuse. Father Michael Ali, the reformist priest who helped document disappearances, dedicated his life to advocating for transparency and reform within the Catholic Church, creating safeguards that would prevent such atrocities from being hidden behind a facade of religious authority again. And yet, for all the revelations the trials had exposed, the final chapter of the Murphy story was still to come. In 1934, nearly 70 years after the fire, and their downfall, construction workers, renovating a building on the same site, broke through a false wall in what had been the old basement. Inside, they discovered a sealed archive, hundreds of documents, photographs, and personal effects that revealed even darker truths about the Murphy operation. Psychological profiles of every victim detailed logs of their methods for breaking human will, and correspondence with similar institutions not just across the United States, but as far away as Europe. Perhaps the most horrifying revelation from the 1934 discovery was the photograph's hundreds of images spanning decades documenting the calculated degradation and abuse of the women imprisoned by the Murphy family. These photographs, taken as both entertainment for clients and as grotesque proof of the so-called rehabilitation process, became crucial evidence for modern investigators, showing acts so vile that 19th century prosecutors would not even have dared present them in court. Alongside these images was a trove of letters linking the Murphys to a vast web of similar institutions in London, Paris, and other European cities. These correspondences discussed techniques for breaking human beings, strategies to avoid legal scrutiny, and even the logistics of exchanging women between institutions, exposing an international trade in suffering disguised under the guise of charity and religion. These letters prove that the Murphy family's enterprise was not an isolated scandal, but part of a much larger system of exploitation that spanned continents. Even more disturbing were Shaw Murphy's personal journals, which laid bare the twisted philosophy that guided him. In these writings, he claimed to be performing divine experiments in human endurance and redemption, justifying torture and psychological destruction as spiritual purification. He wrote with the detachment of a scientist, meticulously noting the effects of various punishments on body and mind, blending theology with cruelty in a way that stripped away any pretense of morality. The archive also included a set of financial ledgers that revealed the true scale of the operation's wealth. These records detailed enormous profits drawn not only from the exploitation of women inside the institution, but also from selling victims to international trafficking rings and collaborating with unscrupulous physicians conducting illegal medical experiments. In modern terms, the income would have amounted to tens of millions of dollars. Among all the evidence, the most heartbreaking finds were the personal belongings of victims. Hidden bundles of letters from families that were never delivered, small crosses and medallions seized during intake photographs of children and parents, and pages torn from secret diaries written in desperation. These items transformed numbers in ledgers into human stories, allowing investigators and historians to begin identifying the women whose lives had been stolen. The rediscovery of these archives sparked a renewed investigation, led by New York's newly formed Historical Crimes Unit. Using modern forensic tools and advanced historical methods, they reconstructed the true breadth of the Murphy family's crimes, uncovering that the network was even larger and more entrenched than previously imagined. Patterns in old disappearance cases across multiple cities revealed that some accomplices who escaped justice in 1866 had quietly continued their activities elsewhere, suggesting that the Murphy family's legacy of abuse and trafficking endured long after the institution itself was reduced to ashes. To this day, the Murphy case remains one of the darkest studies of how authority, unchecked and masked by virtue, can create systems of unimaginable cruelty. Modern criminologists and psychologists study it as an enduring example of how ordinary people can be manipulated or corrupted into supporting, participating in, or ignoring atrocities when those crimes are committed under the shield of institutions that claim to stand for morality and salvation. Historians have studied the Murphy case as a window into the social and political conditions that allowed such an operation to thrive in 19th century America. But its impact goes far beyond the past. It stands as a stark reminder of why skepticism and accountability are essential when dealing with institutions that claim to act in the name of morality or God. For more than 30 years, the Murphys hid behind a veneer of religious respectability, proving how easily good intentions can be twisted into cruelty when no one dares to question authority. Perhaps the most unsettling lesson from the hidden archive is that the Murphy family was not alone. Letters revealed that similar networks of abuse existed across major cities in America and Europe, linked together through corruption and protected by laws that gave religious and charitable organizations almost unchecked power. Their victims were not only the women whose lives were destroyed inside those walls, but society itself poisoned by decades of complicity and silence. The case showed that systematic abuse of the vulnerable doesn't just harm individuals, it corrodes the moral core of a civilization. Out of the ashes of the House of Religious Correction came reforms that transformed how institutions for vulnerable people were run, laying down the principles of oversight, transparency, and rights that remain crucial safeguards today. Yet the Murphy story continues to warn us that evil often hides behind virtue, and that the greatest dangers sometimes come from those who claim to protect. Their story raises haunting questions. Was everything revealed, or do secrets still lie buried in New York's past? How many other houses like theirs might have operated, undetected, shielded by power and respectability? Evidence suggests the network was far larger than the courts ever uncovered. What do you think? Could the full truth of what happened ever be known? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story has gripped you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another journey into the hidden darkness of history. Share this with someone who values true crime and historical mysteries, and help keep these stories alive. The lesson of the Murphy family is clear. The price of safety is eternal vigilance, and those who speak most loudly about morality must be watched most closely of all. By remembering their victims, we renew our promise to never allow such horrors to take root again. See you in our next episode, where we will keep uncovering the dark secrets that history tried to erase. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.